Okay, module 9, auditory processing disorders. Okay, so this week you guys just worry about module 9. Like I said, people I think are overwhelmed and worried. Don't worry, we'll get you through this. Again, this was an unforeseen problem that was not any of your fault. So this week, worry about module 9, and then we'll get everything caught up. I'll update some due dates and things like that. For this week, auditory processing disorders. So this is a hot button for me, just so you guys know. I do apologize, you get to hear my little rampant. I do believe in auditory processing disorders. I don't think it's what I would call common. And the problem that I have with it in general, and this is my issue. Do I think people have auditory processing issues? I do. Do I think it's a real issue? Yes. Do I think it happens by itself without anything else? No. I think I maybe have encountered 2 people, both that's with my adult population I've worked with, as well as child population, that, but again, even when I look at those 2 students that I've had, they also have a lot of other issues. So I feel like auditory processing is not a separate disorder. It's kind of a subset of a bigger issue, i.e. one of them being attention, next one being one of the various factors are attention. So if you have poor attention, often you will also have poor auditory responses, things like that. You can have a processing issue where it takes you a second to process. Not everyone processes things instantaneously. Is that an issue? I don't know. I kind of falter. You know how like there are people that just read faster than others and always will, or there's someone who it just takes them longer to read for whatever reason, and that is just how they're wired. I also think some people are just wired different, not that it's a disorder, just they aren't instantaneous and they're, you know, a split second behind others. I think also too, when I look at auditory processing, when you look at our clients with autism, what do we know? We know autism is definitely part of, they have sensory processing issues. Anybody who's had any kind of hearing loss of some type, you will likely have some auditory processing issues. So I have a hard time calling this a separate disorder. I feel like it's a symptom of a bigger issue or a symptom from the results of other things. Now, again, not for me to decide. I don't get to decide these things. So what I do want to say, though, before I say someone has difficulties auditory processing, an SLP is not making that call. That would come from an audiologist. So if you learn nothing else, and really when we want to diagnose CAPD, so your average audiologist, we don't do it before the age of 9 or 10. Typically speaking, we like to see, before we give someone an auditory processing disorder label, we're looking at someone who's beyond the 3rd grade. So like I said, after the age of 9 or 10. Now, when I look at the few clients that I've had who've had auditory processing issues, or what I would say very clear, succinct, they didn't have a hearing loss. I have one kid, both of these actually, the 2 clients I've had, and one, maybe 3 total. The ones in the high school and the other 2 are, they do not have the ability to discriminate sounds. They really struggle with the sounds, and I feel like the sounds move around in a word, so to speak. So dyslexia for hearing, I guess, is the best way I know how to describe it. And again, the one kid, he sounds like he has a hearing loss. Everyone, like, I'll get my intern, they're like, why are they not wearing hearing aids? I promise you, this poor audiologist, he's had probably 7 full, slew of audiological tests. And if not, he's had them more than one time. And she says there's some kind of just processing issue. I do think he probably has a bigger issue that's not diagnosed yet. And that's just my gut knowing what I know about disorders. But what I can see is that when you have an auditory processing issue, you know, the signal that you're listening to can get altered in a variety of ways. So let's look at some of our read and review information. I don't know why this is popping up this way, but whatever. Okay. I don't know why I don't like it. Again, I'm, you know, I get more like my clients I work with, I don't like change. So this is like a new window. Okay. So what I want to say, and here's processing 101. And to me, processing, I also kind of, to me, that's brain functioning. Processing is our brain working. So the basics of processing, the problem is not the perception or the reception of the signal. Repeating the signal is not helpful. So people are unique and not everyone processes information the same. So I do want to say that as the biggest disclaimer. Just because you don't process at lightning speed doesn't mean you have a disorder. But the other part that we know is that processing is kind of that next thing. Okay, so you have the information, what are you doing with your brain with that information? So, and also too, looking at some of the definitions of them. And I like the second one. So the ability to interpret or attach meaning to information received auditorily and then formulate an expressive response. So just because you hear something, you know, now can you express or explain what you heard? So that's what those two pieces are. I think that that's kind of when I'm looking at processing disorders, that's kind of more of what I'm looking at. So we've also called it CAPD. So you'll see central auditory processing deficits. And so CAPD is a deficit in the neural brain processing of auditory processing. So we're looking at that part of the temporal lobe of the brain. So no, auditory temporal, think right here where your ears are, this is temporal lobe. So looking at some of the deficiencies are, I never say this right, binaural interaction, auditory discrimination, dichotic listening, and then temporal processing. So we definitely see challenges. Whoops, excuse me, 1 second. So the cause of auditory processing is not known. A lot of times we see head trauma, lead poisoning, and then chronic ear infections could play a role, or multiple causes, and it can only be diagnosed by an audiologist. So if you don't remember anything, remember central auditory processing disorder, auditory processing disorder can only be diagnosed by an audiologist, not by a speech therapist. Now, the other thing I want to say is that I do feel someone who has had intermittent hearing loss, so this ear infection piece, if you've had chronic ear infections, and not just because you do means you will have this, but I think some people just, the way they're wired, it just bothers them or impacts them more. But for someone who's had maybe hearing loss for long periods of time and specifically intermittent, so ear infection, poor conductive hearing loss, and then it goes normal and then it goes back to that piece, so that kind of on off thing. Or I do think, and this is my other issue, I think tubes are critical. I think, you know, after your third ear infection, the pediatrician better be recommending you tubes or recommending you to see an ear, nose, and throat specialist. What I also think is sometimes we just have fluid. So little kids, I think for whatever reason, just have fluid, allergies, the way their structures are, whatever. And I think the key piece is that there's not an infection, but there's fluid. So the fluid impacts that message. And I think when our brains are developing, I think it kind of impacts it that way. So when we look at the 5 main problems areas, so auditory attention problems, auditory cohesion problems, auditory discrimination. And this is what I have seen. I have seen some clients that cannot discriminate really have difficulty hearing the differences. So my one student I have, he's an 8th grader now, and I was just talking with the reading person. She's, you know, his reading skills are very poor, but I was telling her he cannot hear the difference. So we're talking about kind of that discrimination task. I said, I have worked with this particular client since he's been, what, a 2nd grader, since he arrived, and he still can't discriminate, not even as an 8th grader now. He cannot do it. And he's another one we keep sending. We're convinced he has a hearing loss. He does not have a hearing loss, but he definitely has a auditory processing challenge. And then looking at auditory memory, auditory attention, and then the figure ground. So this is where people can't pay attention with background noise. So the background noise, and then everything's like drowned out. So really that can be a big challenge for many people. So subtypes: auditory decoding deficit, integration deficit, prosodic deficit. And so kind of look at what does that mean? Lots of what they misheard something really can be challenging in a noisy environment. And definitely we see challenges with reading, decoding, comprehension, and spelling, especially. Characteristics of integration deficits, so other things. Multitasking, poor transitioning, and they just seem to always need more time. Their difficulty in noise depends on the task that's given. We'll see lots of reading, spelling, written language deficits, and then the rhythm of language. So they have that issue with the rhythm. So sometimes, for instance, not always, but when I'm listening to people, so listening to their prosody, and I think it jumps out in our ELL speakers for a variety of reasons. But one thing too is when you've listened to a pattern of language, obviously, I don't want to say they have an auditory processing deficits, but kind of when you think of language, and then that when you're forming and understanding it and building it, and then you go to speak another language that's different. And, you know, if you listen to how they put the stress on the syllables, or how it oftentimes mimics things in their primary language versus what's in, you know, the second language. So it's the same reason why sometimes listening to somebody with a British accent can be challenging. We have to really, like, it's still the same language, but the prosody is different. That's why accents can be a challenge for many of us. So that it's kind of that basics, that those building blocks, or just monotone. So what do we know too? When we look at our clients on the spectrum, a lot of times they do have prosody issues, but I think that's how oftentimes to me, I think that's how they process the sound. Definitely, I've done a couple of different tasks, and it's always interesting to me too, was when these kids, if you've ever done a video and have them watch, adults too, for that matter, and none of us like to always, like when I look into office hours, I'm like, oh gosh, no, I don't sound like that, or oh gosh, that's what I said, I should have done this. Definitely we're looking at how are we perceived by others. I think it's really hard for many people, not just our clients with auditory processing difficulties, but both of these two clients I've had, and I've had them for a long time. I have played videos up the wazoo, having them watch themselves to maybe get some more of that self-monitoring or self-reflection, because a lot of times they argue, I said it right. Okay, you know. And then finally, it's just like, I want them to maybe judge themselves. So I'll have them do something and I'll videotape it and have them watch it. Like a couple times he's like, that's not what I said. Like both of them, we've gotten in pretty heated arguments about the fact that that's not what he said. And I'm like, well, what did you hear now? And then they oftentimes can correctly tell me what they are, but they're like, that's not what I said. That's not what I sound like. That's not what I did. So that always, I find that very interesting. And oftentimes too, kind of those intent of message. So sometimes I think these are also our clients that may be challenged with sarcasm or tone of voice, or what some of those little nuances in our language, what that represents, and getting that language meaning out of it. I think they could definitely struggle with that. So give you some more examples. Okay, treatment. Let's talk about treatment. Now, what I want to say, usually what we're looking at, and I do like these super duper handouts. I feel like they give some great, what I would say, basic understanding. So a lot of times what we're doing, we're not necessarily ever going to take away an auditory processing disorder. So just know, we're never taking away an auditory processing disorder. Therapy isn't going to fix it. We're really working on management. How do we either remediate some things or manage some of our challenges? What can we use to help them compensate? What can we teach them to use to compensate for their difficulties? So a lot of times too, we'll do compensatory strategies, environmental modifications, or direct treatment. And oftentimes what we see is if they've got language challenges, we don't want to have that be impacting their ability to listen and get the auditory message. So we usually do language also when we're looking at someone who has a suspected auditory processing. We want to rule that out. A lot of these are accommodations, like in a classroom-based setting. So the teacher's speaking spot, or what's their preferential seating, what's the teacher's strong side, I call it usually, and where should they be in proximity. So we also teach how do we listen, or we also teach too, how can they clarify the message to make sure they are getting the right message. So oftentimes they just always assume they have it right, and they don't know how to do a self-check. So oftentimes we work on self-checking. How do we make sure we got the information correct? How do we do that checking piece in conversation in a more formal manner? How do we communicate with maybe our boss or our teacher to make sure we are getting the right message? So the other thing too is sound field amplification systems. Honestly, I think I wish every school was equipped. A lot of the new schools are equipped with this. A lot of smart boards have the microphone automatic. So we definitely should utilize that more. I think that helps everybody, not just attention. We're talking about attention, language challenges, ADHD, emotional disabilities. I think any kind of sound field amplification system is super helpful for any student. Definitely looking at teaching them, okay, I need the keyword. What's the keyword? What's the word I need remembered? What other kind of things can I do so I can ensure myself getting the message? So kind of how do we help them help themselves? So how do we help them reduce their auditory noise? So we kind of work on maybe localization of sound. A lot of this is more like our auditory training things. Teach metacognitive skills. So you're going to see that. So what are these thinking about our thinking kind of thing. And again, and I call them more compensatory. How to ask for clarification. How should I verbalize that to be sure I'm getting the right message? Or how can I get the main idea? How do I get the gist of what they're saying versus focusing on each individual word, kind of getting the big picture versus all the little minute details, and really looking at, am I getting the important things? How do we do this self-check for important information? And oftentimes we do work on discrimination of sounds. So a lot of that minimal pairs, a lot of that rhyming, that phonological awareness, blending, those kinds of things. So oftentimes we're doing phonological awareness skills, but again, some of this is not relevant for everybody, or we're doing other kind of minimal pair work, which looks similar to articulation, helping them work on differentiation of sounds. Okay, phoneme awareness. So phonological awareness skills. So we've got initial sound identification, grammatical closure, discrimination skills, phoneme to grapheme. So how do we go from what we listen to the visual representation of it? And then those phonemic processing skills. So definitely working on all of those, what I would call literacy, and a lot of that's literacy, obviously. Memory, meta-memory strategies. What are things we can do to help? And really, to me, we kind of look at more of those executive function skills. All right, I know I struggle listening. Okay, so what can I do to help myself listen better? What can I do to help myself stay on track or pay attention when the teacher's talking? What are some ways I can cue myself to do those things? So often, what do we use? Meta-memory strategies, which are often multisensory strategies for multisensory learning. And that's like, for those of you who've done 212, we look at, are you kinesthetic learner? Are you an auditory learner? Are you a verbal learner? What are some of the ways that you learn best? And how do we combine those things to give you the multisensory experience so you can remember things or learn the information? So classroom modifications, accommodations, and other barrier strategies. So I like barrier strategies. I can't remember what our BCBAs call it. Again, I'm having word finding issues, but barrier strategies. And what I look at from a barrier strategy are, what are some alternate things we can do? Like, okay, if this isn't clear, so this situation is going on, how clear, muffled is the sound? Okay, what else do I need to do? Do I need to have better lighting? Do I need to have a better background? Or for instance, I just know in certain, like I can do work and have the TV on. I cannot do work and have music on. I don't know why, but I know that that's not going to be an auditory good thing for me. Or I was listening to a training, and if music's on, I know I can't listen to words and music, but I can listen to words and words. So a TV being on and myself, listening to something is easier for me to filter out. I have a harder time filtering out sound. So kind of some of those things. What's a barrier for me getting the message? Well, if I'm in a place where there's music, it's why I hate to go to restaurants with music or live music. I don't enjoy them because I can't focus on the words. So it's things like that. I know in certain listening environments, what are positive for me and what are negative, and what are those factors? What can I do to reduce that? What are some other accommodations? What else can I do to support somebody in a school or maybe workplace? And oftentimes too, what are some of the other just environmental factors? So for instance, I don't know if any of you've worked in a place or if you have a room in your house that is horrible with sound or carries every sound, or in our back room over here, which always amazes me, I can't ever hear anything that's going on in the house for the most part, unless they're right outside the door. So I feel like, oh, we got some pretty good, sound barriers in between this room, our offices, and the rest of the house. So, for me, I know if I want to have quiet, this is the room to go to versus my bedroom or, our kitchen table. I know I'm never going to have any quiet and peace there. So, what else can we do? Obviously, we need to also teach the client how to deal with it. Maybe there are other important people like their teacher, like their boss, like their family to support that auditory piece. But like I said, we rarely have auditory processing in and of itself. So this week, what else do we have this week? Sorry, oh, I'm on the right page. So here's some clips. So you watch the clips and then, you know, a short paragraph about that. So that's kind of our observation. One moment. And there's a quiz. So definitely look at what are some of the pieces of auditory processing. Kind of look at the definition, look at kind of the subtypes, be familiar with who diagnoses it, and what are some of the challenges and some of the compensatory strategies. So just kind of, it's more general. And then there's a read and review, right? Yes, and then a read and review summary. So, you know, how can we help someone who does? And what you'll find too, as you guys work with clients of various ages and with various disorders, oftentimes you'll see an auditory processing challenge with regards to another one. Another common disorder that I think a lot of our clients will have struggles with auditory processing is our clients with cerebral palsy. I think that in and of itself is a processing challenge. Just something as basic as sensory processing disorder oftentimes will also have auditory processing. And even if you have, like, let's say auditory sensitivity, that can affect your processing depending on where your tolerance is. So yeah, cerebral palsy is one. Definitely think anybody with some kind of what I would say neurological disorder starts to have challenges. So our clients with ALS, our clients with MS, we start to see some auditory processing challenges in a variety of ways. And again, it depends on how fast. So usually what's nice is if it happens slowly, they develop great compensatory strategies. But again, that's just a factor with how fast and how much their disease is progressing. So those progressive neurological disorders, we definitely see some challenges. Autism's another one. Also too, anybody who's had like some kind of craniofacial anomaly or some kind of other injury to the vestibular cochlear nerve. And then somebody had asked about cochlear implants. So obviously, if you've had a cochlear implant, we have disrupted the auditory system. In general, and in general speaking, this is a gross generalization. This is not an LBL. But if you've had a hearing issue of some type, you will have an auditory processing challenge by default. So oftentimes you have a mild hearing loss, you can have some auditory processing challenges. You've had, you know, conductive loss, you'll have some challenges. So that's not a separate thing. That's kind of the result of the injury, the hearing loss, whatever your hearing issue is. Auditory processing is kind of secondary to that. So just remember that too. So yes, it's very often someone with some type of hearing challenge, of course, will have some processing issues or utilizing the residual hearing that they have. So it's kind of by default, you can get that. So that's what's hard about this disorder. And if you still feel like you're confused, that's okay. Typically speaking, as speech therapists, we're working on teaching compensatory strategies to support their processing. We're not really trying to remediate the processing. In general, you can't remediate processing. You can just hope skills enhance the processing to speed it up, or you develop the compensatory strategies so you can adjust in a timely manner. So any other questions about that? Hopefully I didn't confuse you. Sorry, this is a hot topic for me. All righty. If that's all, I appreciate you guys joining me. Thank you for hanging in. I know it's terribly unsettling. It's very unsettling for me. I am trying to get caught up with everything. I'll be posting announcements and updates with the date. So this week, just worry about module 9 and we'll worry about the rest later. So if you want to know what to focus on, that's like one thing you can focus on. And then, you know, we'll get everybody through this, I promise. Any other questions? If not, thank you for joining.
Bye, thank you.
I do have a question.
Sure.
So I wasn't able to turn in one of the midterms. Is
Okay.
it okay? Is it okay if I turn it in tomorrow?
You sure can.
Well, okay, so it's kind of weird because, well, it's kind of dumb of me to be honest, because I did 2 of them, but I was just gonna turn all 3 of them in at the same time, so I didn't turn in like the 2 that I have. But I'm
Okay.
still missing one of them.
Okay, well, turn in what you have and just get it done.
Okay.
This is hard. Like I said, everyone has a lot of grace periods. So whatever you don't have turned in, turn in. I don't think I've graded very many midterms yet. So yeah, just get them in and then I wouldn't sweat
Okay.
it.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to like stress you out even more.
Yeah, you get a reprieve because you know we were locked out for gosh, way too long. Okay.
Yeah, and I had emails, but I'm sure you're flooded with emails. So
I have not got up to speed on, I was barely able to get in yesterday afternoon. So I am way behind. I was super sick yesterday. I've had a massive sinus infection. So I am trying to get caught up, but if there's something pressing, send me another email. But
Okay.
whatever you have, get your stuff turned in. Okay.
Yeah, I will for sure tomorrow. But thank you
Okay.
so much. I hope you feel better.
Yeah, thank you.